welcome all of you once again to this function. Uh, the thing I wish to start with is the foundation is very happy to organize this function because of the simple reason that one of its primary objectives is the preservation and promotion of history, heritage, and culture. And we are very happy that J Sai Deepak accepted our invitation to come here and speak about his latest book, India, Bharat, and Pakistan, the Constitutional Journey of a Sandwiched Civilization. Thank you very much, sir, for being here. I request our President, Srimati Pramoda Devi Vadiyar, to present a bouquet to him. Distinguished people in the audience, I extend a warm welcome to everyone. We have the Vice Chancellor, current and acting, Professor Rajshekhar, Dr. Shivana, Dr. Viliyappa, again a former Vice Chancellor, Dr. Vasant Kumar, Dr. G.K. Balakrishnan, and Shri K.V. Ganapati is also here somewhere. He prefers to sit at the back. I requested him to come in front, but he prefers to be there. And to all the distinguished guests here, thank you all very much for being here. With these words, I would like to request Pramoda Devi Vadiyar and J Sai Deepak to come over to the stage and...
Namaskara. Good evening to all of you. Thank you all for accepting our invite. The foundation is a forum with diverse objectives. Since inception, we have organized events on Ayurveda and architecture, health and sports, heritage and culture, education and environment, besides undertaking restoration of heritage buildings. This is the first event organized on history. History is subjective and objective. Different historians have different approaches and views about what happened in the past, and we respect varied views and perspectives. Today we are eager to hear our guest this evening, Shri J Sai Deepak, who needs no introduction, but in keeping with the established norms of the function, I would like to formally introduce him to the audience. Shri J Sai Deepak is an engineer turned lawyer, practicing as an arguing counsel, primarily before the Supreme Court of India and the High Court of Delhi. A mechanical engineer from Anna University, he graduated with a bachelor's degree in law from IIT Kharagpur's law school in 2009 and has carved a niche for himself as a litigator in civil, commercial, and constitutional matters. Over the years, he has been a part of several landmark matters, such as the ones relating to the Sabrimala Ayyappa temple, the Sri Padmanabha Swami temple, and Basmati geographical indications. In 2019, he was awarded the Young Alumni Achievers Award by Zama Mater, IIT Kharagpur. Apart from delivering lectures on law, he is a prolific writer on constitutional issues for leading newspapers and magazines. Shri Sai Deepak is also the senior counsel in one of many important cases, legal battles I'm fighting. On behalf of all of you, I extend a hearty congratulations on the tremendous success of the two books, India, that is Bharat, and the second book, India, Bharat, Pakistan, a constitutional journey of a sandwich civilization, topic of his talk today. I believe that the third and fourth books will be out sometime soon, for which the research is underway. And hopefully, we see them on the shelf soon. I take this opportunity to wish you all the season's greetings and a very happy, healthy, and a peaceful 2023. Thank you.
Before I request J Sai Deepak to speak, I just would like to inform everyone that his talk will last for about 30 minutes. This will be followed by the interaction session that we have already shown on the invitation. Those of us who would like to ask questions at the end of that, still, you could raise your hands or pass on your names here and we would take the questions. Over to you.
For taking time out despite a personal situation. So I'm grateful to him for being here and for finishing his role as the master competitor. Thank you so very much, sir. Thank you so much. Thank you. I'm grateful to the foundation for having given me an opportunity to once again interact with the citizens of the cultural capital of Karnataka. I hope that the number of lectures and the number of talks that I've delivered over the last few months during the course of the book tour of the second book have not emptied the basket of thoughts that I have to share. And I hope that I'm at least in a better position to recast and restate what I have already shared before. But I think the job will be done better based on the sharp questions that I hope to receive from the members of the audience. So the better part of the session has been kept interactive so that I'm subjected to perhaps a grilling cross-examination, and let's see how I come out of it. So something interesting happened. Over the last few weeks, something new has been brewing on the Sabarimala front, which most people are not aware of. So a petition was filed, perhaps a few months ago, challenging a notification issued by the Kerala state government and the Travancore Devaswam board. The notification effectively said that, rather it invited applications from members of the Malayali Brahmin community for the position of the male Shanti of the Sabarimala temple. Now this notification is the subject of a challenge before the Kerala High Court on the grounds that the eligibility criteria spelled out in the notification is violative of principles of Article 14 of the Constitution and violative of principles of equality, and that perhaps it has a slightly casteist tone. That seems to be the subject of challenge. And I wasn't aware of it. Barely a week ago, I was made aware of it. And fortunately, an entity which has been fighting for the traditions of the temple in the Supreme Court, People for Dharma, engaged me once more to argue the matter. And the court has been taking up this matter almost every Saturday. So today, when I was supposed to leave from Bangalore to Mysore, is when the matter got listed at 10:15 in the morning. So fortunately, thanks to the change in workflow patterns, which COVID has induced, I was able to do this hearing virtually. So I was on the way from Bangalore to Mysore doing the hearing and listening to the entire arguments because my turn is yet to come. The court has been kind enough to reserve a specific date so that I can make my submissions on the 28th of January. The nitty-gritties and the nuts and bolts of the case apart, my sense is that this is the third round of challenge to the practices of the temple. The first happened in the 50s. The second happened in 2006 through the petition that resulted in the judgment of 2018, where gender was the weapon. The third round of attack involves caste. It is relentless. It's almost as if the temple can't catch a break. It's almost as if the temple can't breathe in peace. And somehow that deity seems to be constantly under some kind of challenge under one pretext or another. Beyond this, I will not make any submissions which I wish to make before the court. One, because the matter is sub judice, and second, I don't see the point in revealing my script. But the larger question being that this is perhaps indicative of the state of affairs. Perhaps the larger point that I'm trying to make is that while we keep taking confidence and drawing heart from political victories, some things continue unchanged, regardless of who is in power. And over the last few months, and especially after the second book was done and dusted, I felt that it's important to impress upon whatever little audience that I'm in a position to engage with, the need to invest in policy more than politics. Because policy is more long lasting, it has effects which last beyond a generation. And politics which do not result in change in policies are ephemeral in nature in terms of victories. So, in terms of my own change of attitude, perhaps there will be a shift from my fire and brimstone style of submission to a slightly more calm way of engaging with people. Because I think getting people excited is only half the job done, but if they don't know what they're supposed to do with that excited energy, then I think it's a loss of an opportunity. And after 5 years or 6 years of engagement with the public, over 400 lectures, I'm in some position to at least push through a few ideas and hope that it translates to policy push. I'm hoping that this state, and I've said this very often, given the kind of legacy that it continues to enjoy, the dharmic legacy that continues to be seized of, will be at the forefront of it. I think earlier this year, we had an announcement being made by the government. Rest assured, I certainly want to assure the organizers that given the nature of the August platform that I'm speaking from, I will rein in my usual controversial tendencies, and I will keep this as diplomatic as possible. Despite that, if something comes out, please attribute it to the noblest of intentions. All I can say is a few months ago, when a statement or a policy statement was issued by the government of Karnataka that they're interested in releasing temples from state control, barely a week ago, I think that statement was taken back. That proposal has been dropped, citing some kind of bureaucratic hurdle. I'm not even sure how many people paid attention to it, because the announcement managed to grab a lot of headspace and headline space, but the retraction of the proposal hasn't found enough traction. So this is exactly how we move 2 steps forward and 4 steps backward. It's like a reverse salsa at play. I don't know what's going on here. So how does this tie into the larger theme of the second book? I have learned much more valuable lessons from the proponents of Pakistan than from the Congress party during the course of the writing of the book. Their single-minded focus, their ability to marshal muscle where needed, their ability to bring muscle and brains together when needed, and their ability to stick to their positions with zero moderation or dilution is something now I have come to deeply admire. I've said this often. The state of the Hindu society today is largely a product of its policy of accommodation, concession, and moderation. And therefore, that's a slippery slope which effectively comes to a point where you see absolutely nothing worthy of preservation. So someone tried to, so during the course of a friendly argument with a colleague, I was told that I'm a conservative, and apparently the friend is a liberal. So I basically said, where do these words come from? And what meanings would you want to impute to these terms in the Indian context? But even if I were to accept the allegation that I'm a conservative, I'll proudly wear it as a badge of honor. Because at the end of the day, it is the conservative who sees value in preserving something of the past. Identity is preserved by conservatism. Continuity of identity and tradition is the single direct product of conservatism. Therefore, any negative connotations which are imputed to conservatism need to be done away with. Those who protect achara, sampradaya, tradition are the ones single-handedly responsible for keeping the bija alive. They are in the business of keeping, or let's say in the business of bija raksha. So if conservatism translates to bija raksha, I'm guilty of it. I happily plead guilty. Why is this important? I think gradually we are moving to a point where all our angry energies are being misdirected at the worst of issues possible, also reflecting our lack of priorities. I don't know if people have been following the controversy surrounding a particular movie in Bollywood that's been released and the song which was released over the last 2 to 3 weeks. I was really aghast. I'm not going to comment on what I feel about that particular song or the movie in general. But is a movie and a song more important to the Hindu community than policy? Has it come to a point where we really don't understand what is important? I certainly am not someone who will stand up for any kind of denigration of a religious belief through the popular culture. I'm not for it one bit. But it's surprising that we're able to muster this kind of traction and this kind of support for the boycott of a movie, but when it comes to getting the job done on the policy front, there is practically no traction at all. So it seems as if we latch on to small, myopic, seeming victories and let go of everything that's important. So the elephant manages to slip through the hands, but we manage to retain the tail of the elephant and keep crying. So I genuinely hope that by the time we inch towards 2024, the community manages to crystallize its serious policy concerns and pushes it into the electoral agenda of major parties. And I use the word parties in plural, not in singular. Because unless that is done, 2014 is done, 2019 is done, 2024 will also be done. And perhaps you may get more than 303. Would it have translated to a better situation from a policy perspective for the community that has voted the dispensation to power? That's the hard, uncomfortable question that I would choose to ask. Please do not feel the need to constantly clap for anyone. It makes really no sense. That's all I would say. I genuinely don't believe that everything that comes out of my mouth is a pearl of wisdom that requires applause. Apply this to the macro level for anybody else in public life. I am not in public life in the sense of occupying a public position or a constitutional position. Those occupying positions of power must be held to hard account on the promises made and their delivery, so to speak. I think it's a fantastic luxury we have at this point, where there are still significant portions of this great land which have not yet been subjected to Pakistanification. Count those blessings. And while you still have the ability to preserve the core of this country, make sure that a few hard deliverables are achieved. Because usually, what seems like peacetime lulls you into a certain degree of complacence, coupled with electoral victories, and a lot of things happen under the radar which go completely unnoticed. Perhaps I'm asking the audience to become aware of not the stillness at the surface, but at the layers below the surface, and recognize certain patterns and movements. We live in an unfortunate generation where newspapers cannot be trusted, where news channels cannot be trusted, and I say this across the board. Nobody is neutral anymore. Everything is fully partisan. Therefore, the burden of having to discern and decipher the truth is entirely on the reader. It's an extremely difficult position to be in, because each person presents his or her own narrative with a lot of conviction and a lot of gusto, leaving you with the question, as a common person who has his or her own life to take care of, how am I expected to make the right informed choice if this is the kind of competing narratives that I'm constantly presented with? That is where perhaps it's important to build a core group of people, or a core group of institutions for that matter, whose only job is to preserve your interest and advance your agenda. Because political actors will always have their own incentives and pulls and tugs. Rest assured, at a certain level, you realize that the pulls and tugs don't necessarily come from within, but they come from outside to a huge extent. In the age of multinationals, never underestimate the power of influence coming from outside. I don't wish to purvey or push any conspiracy theories. All I can say is that these are the realities at a certain level. The question that perhaps I would also want to ask myself is, the anger and the excitation that we see during the elections with respect to scandals and corruptions, have they translated to convictions at all in the first place after 9 years of being in power? If that's not the case, it's almost as if there is an unsaid rule that certain lines will not be crossed between two seemingly opposing factions. Which means we can keep fighting with each other on Facebook, but looks like the fight there is not exactly a fight. That's all I will limit myself to saying. And in such a precarious position, you end up even asking yourself, is the democratic setup a facade for power sharing between two groups? That takes you to a larger serious question. But I'll keep those meta questions for later. Maybe I'll ponder over these questions maybe 25 years later, when I know for a fact that the safety and security of my community is assured, which I'm not assured of as of now. In the age of assumed neutrality and unspoken partisanship, let me say this bluntly. I have biases, I have prejudices, and I have very clear positions. My priority is my community and nobody else. I have no interest in running in a popularity contest to get applause and acceptance from across the board. I don't even want applause and recognition from my own people as long as they can take care of themselves. So the hope is that we try and produce more people who are intransigent, who are hawks, and who are hardliners, and therefore who are conservatives to the bone. The value of conservatism is something that crumbling societies like Europe and America are beginning to realize gradually after having given way to hyper-individualism, where the core unit, which is the family structure, has been destroyed beyond recognition. The kind of assault that this core unit has been subjected to is unimaginable. So I don't see the point in living in a country which provides for great infrastructure, fantastic roads, amazing quality of life, but whose societal infrastructure has completely made way for the most hedonistic, chaotic kind of lifestyle imaginable. I don't know what is the incentive for someone who's lived in a society like Bharat to move to the West, unless you yourself have given up on the value of the family unit, and therefore your priorities are slightly different. I can completely relate to the position of the people who moved to the West until 1991 or perhaps even until the early 2000s because of lack of opportunities despite qualification. Because you want to equip yourself with advanced degrees in the hope that you come back and serve this country. I get all of that. But I don't understand the continued exodus. At the very least, I'd say from 2010 onwards. So, most people might mistake the theme of the second book as being Pakistan-centric, given its color, given the title, and given the subject and the examination of the two-nation theory. Rest assured, that is only the first layer, that is only the topsoil. The harder questions that I'm perhaps asking myself is, what is it that the Muslim community has done right which Hindus have not? That's a very serious question to ask. Maybe there's a different way of looking at the question. But in general, I think they've done quite a few things right. I'm sure most people wouldn't have expected these words to come out of my mouth. But I'm a serious realist who is ruthless when it comes to SWOT analysis. The truth may be unpalatable, it may be uncomfortable, but you don't have the option of pixelating it or sugarcoating it. Should you choose to do so, the truth does not suffer, you will suffer, that's it. So, I'd say that more than the first book, the second book has been a greater realization. There's a decent chance that the first book was also written with a certain degree of ego investment, which is to say that I want to put out myself out there as someone who can write. And I was answering to the left's constant jibes that members of the non-left don't have brains, this and that. So maybe it was my intellectual ego which drove the exercise behind the writing of the first book. But by the time the writing of the second book was done halfway through, the ego had to make way for serious realization. That these questions are not esoteric questions for us to ponder over after the age of 60, but these are existential, survival-related questions at a very fundamental level. So as a conscious choice, one of the things that I've decided, and maybe this is my New Year resolution, the Gregorian New Year resolution, that's not a new year, is that I will significantly wind down my public engagements over the course of the next 1 year. Be hyper selective in the interest of producing more content out which can last the test of time and posterity than ephemeral YouTube videos which translate only to thug life videos. I'm not interested in it. This is a very conscious decision that I've taken in the hope that it translates to something more productive and more valuable. And in this sense, my inspiration is a leading stalwart and a child of this city, Sri S.L. Bhairappa. I was told that one of his most popular statements, and since I don't exactly understand Kannada as much, I was told that one of the things that he said, and I'm paraphrasing it here, is that Sahitya Krishi requires silent work. I am not exactly a writer or an author. It's a demotion for a practicing lawyer to be called an author and a writer. I will never accept those tags. I don't earn my livelihood from either of these two facets. I don't wish to, I don't want to. Because I'm extremely proud of my capabilities as a lawyer. There's not a single humble bone in my body when it comes to my legal skills. I don't wish to be humble about it the Indian way. Oh, I also know something. I don't relate to that kind of humility at all. I'm happy to learn from anybody else, but I don't see the point in downplaying myself. And therefore, the hope through this moonlighting exercise of writing is to engage with the society going beyond the confines of my profession. And the more I realize that there is so much that I don't know, I feel every public engagement is time lost in reading more. And perhaps my greatest regret is that I don't know a single non-English language or an Indian language with the proficiency and fluency with which I can speak this damned language called English. For someone who constantly speaks of decoloniality, I think it's a badge of shame, not a badge of honor. And I will take away the argument from the Dravidianist idiots that I don't know how to write or read Tamil, despite it being my mother tongue. All this effectively means that I have to make more time despite my existing professional commitments. And the only way I can do that is to go easy on the constant travel and put my head down and do more. In that sense, I'm very happy that Mysore happens to be perhaps the turning point of this decision, because in this book tour calendar, we initially decided around 11th of December. And the last two places that I wanted to visit before I said Swaha, closure sesame for this, was Kashi and Mysore. One because of Shiva and the other for the lady sitting at top of the hill, Chamundeshwari. I hope to wind down this tour with this session. Anything else that comes about will be responded to and reciprocated only as an act of public courtesy, but with really no private or personal investment, because I'm done with this shosha for a while. The hope is that I hope to at least think of a flagship platform using the royalty from the books to create a debating platform for the next generation, so that they know how to present an argument, so that they know how to build an argument, so that they know the art of research, so that they understand the importance of powerful, confident, calm articulation. These are essential skills for this community, because you will be constantly asked to defend your identity and justify your identity and explain your identity in the coming years. So, as someone who thinks that he has something to contribute on this particular front, I've been talking to a few like-minded friends about this in the hope of creating some kind of a flagship event, because I think I'm getting repetitive, and two, the idea is to get more and more youngsters into this entire movement and give them an opportunity to hone and sharpen their skills with the guidance of a lawyer and with the guidance of a lot of other people who are subject matter specialists when it comes to their own areas. Let's see how that this seed of an idea translates to something real. But I'm happy that I'm getting to share this with the enlightened audience of Mysore. And I hope that Mysore will feature significantly as part of this plan, so to speak, in terms of attracting talent for dharmic articulation, not just in English, but in all Bharatiya languages. So with these opening submissions, I shall rest my case, and I look forward to the questions. Thank you. Could someone perhaps be kind enough to handle the moderation aspect? So I think he's getting the mic. Mic? Okay. Yes, please.
You're audible, sir. You're audible. I completely agree with your statement that there must be more constant policy than politicking. Well, I will make an observation and then I'll ask my question. I hope you won't mind it.
Please.
Now, the audience, I won't take long. You see, when you read the history of India, what you find is that the original inhabitants of India are the Adivasis. They are the ones who are supposed to be here even before the Dravidians came. And later, it was the Aryans who conquered the Dravidians, especially in the north, and you find their bastion is now in the south. Now, what have we done all these years, these 75 years after independence and even these 9 years, to mitigate their suffering? And if you take the reasonable poverty line, not the Indian poverty line, you'll find about 50% of our population are really underprivileged and are, you can call them below the poverty line or just at that level. Now, what have we done? We haven't done much for them. This is my own feeling. I was looking up Google for some statistics, and what I found was that today the gap between the rich and the poor in the last 5 years has increased. And you have some of the richest men in the world in India today. And I find that every time we pay lip sympathy to this 50%, but we haven't done anything as a real matter of policy, where you'll tackle this on a kind of a war footing. Now, am I right in my observation? And what do you think about this?
No, I prefer standing. Basic energy won't go. I disagree fundamentally with your question. The opening factual assumptions are thoroughly factually inaccurate. On the issue of Adivasi, on the definition of Adivasi, on the use of the word Dravidian, and on your belief in the Aryan invasion theory, I fully disagree. Completely. I'll explain, sir. I'll explain my position. I am not a geneticist. I am not an archaeologist. I don't have a functional training or even a basic training of anthropology. So with these caveats and disclaimers, allow me to spell out what I've understood based on the literature. There has never been a more diabolical hoax in the history of this country than the invention of the Aryan invasion theory. The pernicious hoax that it has and the kind of damage it has caused to this country. Unbelievable. The use of the word Adivasi is based on the European colonizer's projection of his behavior on this country, where he believes that since I have colonized a certain society, people preceding me would have also followed suit in that particular sense, and they would have also resorted to colonization. And the word Adivasi was coined by them, was never used by us. When you use words like Adivasi and Mool Nivasi, you are entrenching and creating the notion, or the other way around, that we are all akin to the European colonizer. It's only a question of time difference. He came later, but we came before, but we did the same thing that he did to us. The history on this particular subject tells you that this is not the truth. They did not have any scientific basis to start this. For the last 150 years, not 75 years, for the last 150 years, we have been fighting this myth which was fabricated without any basis. So, barely a week ago at the Tamil Nadu Dialogues, I had the opportunity to deliver a 1-hour lecture capturing the journey of this absolute toxic concept called Dravidianism, starting from 1800s right until the Sabarimala movement, based on very clear literature. saying how it was fabricated by the missionaries. With evidence, I can cite the evidence, I can cite the books. And some of those books were written by them, saying this is a hoax. So, Aryan invasion theory should never be the starting point of a discussion when it comes to Janajatis or Panchamas according to us. The language that we use is Panchamas because they cannot be fit under the Chaturvarna system. That's largely the definition, or let's say the term that is used for them. Second, the world is revisiting questions of development and progress after having made all the mistakes that the West has forced upon us. Learning very clearly that while the West has a lot to offer from the perspective of what they see as science, so on and so forth, their understanding of nature and how to protect nature-based communities is absolutely zero compared to us. They don't know how to respect nature. Every model of development that is based on the Western model is constantly based on exponential, continuous, ceaseless, relentless growth. And in the long run, it will see Bangalorification of Mysore. And that's how it starts. We judge the value of all these developments, so to speak, on the basis of the immediate, let's say, benefits that we get because we are stakeholders in the system. But when you move perhaps 60,000 feet above and you ask, what is the overall picture? You will see only destruction across the board. So does this mean I'm saying leave them alone? Don't they need health care? No, I'm not saying any of those things. Don't they need access to medical facilities? I'm making none of those statements. I'm only saying the discussion need not be in these binaries. The choice is not between the West and glorification of poverty. The truth always lies in the middle. If I may, I'll just finish my point. The concept of restrained consumption and the concept of respect for non-human beings, as long as that is not drilled as part of our development discourse, you will see that we are penny wise and pound foolish in the long run. How do we go about addressing this issue? One, the hypercity model is destructive. Creation of cities beyond a point is not sustainable. Then the hope is that you try and create an economy which does two things. Prevents migration from the so-called rural centers to urban centers beyond a point. And two, nature-based economy needs to be revisited and reconsidered. You can use technology to further these goals. But if technology takes the center stage beyond a point, as a former engineer who practices intellectual property, which is perhaps the most capitalistic form of property possible, I know what exactly happens in pharma industries and other places. Take it from me when I say this. It's a house of glass waiting to crumble. If the last 6 months have told us anything about this entire hyper-vaccination drive that we were pushed into over the last 2 years, it is that science is capable of being fabricated, even in the most critical of subjects. From climate change to pandemic, nothing is an exception to this rule, because the moment you have the MNC interest stepping into the picture, I am not a communist, but I know exactly how the corporate interests work. So we really need to go back to the basics in terms of understanding what did we do right to respect nature and also improve the quality of life. I'm not saying change the definition in such a way that bad looks good. I'm not suggesting that. But do not subscribe to these notions is all I'm going to say. You had a follow-up question, please go ahead. Ask.
Yes,
Please use the mic.
I just want to clarify.
Yes, sir, yes.
You see, I got I got my facts from Google.
Okay.
And that is one which I think most people now refer to.
Right.
So I feel you should write to Google.
Okay.
Honestly.
Okay.
Seriously.
Okay.
Because after all, most of us are guided by
Right,
Google.
right.
It's such a handy thing.
Right,
And
right.
it's right in the palm of your hand. You can
Right.
always switch it on and then see it. So please do write to the Google, but you still haven't told me
Yes.
who are the original inhabitants of India.
Okay. ठीक.
And exactly how has the whole history worked out.
Okay.
But I will not continue with this because
Right.
I know others want to ask
Sure,
questions.
sure.
Please let them do so.
Very short, crisp answer. Read the first section of my first book. I've explained this in detail.
First section.
First section of my first book.
First section of your first.
First book. This is the
Okay.
precise issue that I've addressed.
Okay.
Citing literature. You don't need to go to Google. Come to JSD. I've addressed this, citing missionary literature, citing literature of anthropologists who visited all the tribal areas in India, and these are Mexican anthropologists and researchers who have come and said, it's so horrendous in this country that almost every tribal district is divided like beggar colonies between missionaries and evangelicals, between Anglicans and Lutherans and this church and that church, so on and so forth. And they have an almanac of sorts that these are the number of souls that have been harvested each year. I will show this from their own literature. Nobody can challenge me on these facts. Nobody can even think of initiating legal action against me because the book has been around for 1.5 years now. The facts have been in public domain. Nobody has had the guts to call me on these facts. Because I followed the principle of marshalling evidence the way a lawyer does in the court of law. The original structure of the book was meant to be in the form of a submission which is captured before the Supreme Court on how history has done injustice to this country and its civilization. But I thought it would be too dramatic. And I wanted this book to enter the portals of few academic institutions. Unfortunately or fortunately, both the books have made it to the Cambridge Library database. And I said, you guys read it. You need it more than anybody else. So it's not a matter of pride for me whether Cambridge reads or not, because I wanted my people to read this first so that the myths in their heads are busted first. My audience will always remain my people first, because if they get their facts right, I hope that it translates to more enlightened conversations. So pardon me for disagreeing with you, but these are the facts, sir. This is where I stand. I'm fairly backed by evidence on my position. Next.
On a lighter note,
Yes.
Sundaram Pichai is right now in Bangalore. So in case you want to meet him.
Sure.
But my question is on going back to the freeing temples from the government.
Yes, sir.
My little understanding of temples historically is they're more than a place of worship. They had a role to play in the local economic development, keeping the social fabric together.
Right.
Now, I know that Article 25 gives us the freedom. Now, why is it not being challenged when other religions have freedom?
Louder, louder. Yes.
Other
What is not
religions-
being challenged?
The control of the government on the temples
Right.
is not being challenged in Article 25. We have
Right.
freedom of. And the least the government can do is prescribe a guideline as to how a trust should be formed, who should be the representative, so that the casteism and creedism does not enter.
Right.
And they should be done with it. Why are they not doing it?
So I think I've done at least 30 lectures on temple freedom, and I've taken a conscious call to not talk on it except in court. But let me answer your question. One, every government has at least two incentives to have deep tentacles in the temple ecosystem. First, money. Second is VIP darshans. You can facilitate it. That's a sign of power. If you can get a darshan in Tirupati and you can get it arranged, please tell me it's not a matter of pride for a few people. It is, right? 3, money, the first point that I said is official. The third category of money is unofficial. Gold, land, real estate. So, generally speaking, every politician has a stake in it. All major legislations in this country which control temples are in some form of challenge before the Supreme Court. More petitions have been filed. I'll tell you what happens. One set of petitions get filed, they complete their journey, they're ready for arguments. Then someone files a second round of petition. Until pleadings are complete in that second batch of petitions, you can't start arguments. Each time the matter is ready, comes a new batch of petitions. That makes me wonder, who is filing them strategically? The matter is ready for arguments after 10 years. And then comes the new batch. What is going on? I am not questioning the bona fides of everyone, because you see, sometimes it so happens that some people may see that the first batch of petitions have raised certain arguments, but they have not raised certain other arguments. So they may want to complement or supplement those arguments through a new batch of petitions. I get that. But these are the realities of litigation. A lawyer only will be able to relate to this. 3, it's not as if all temples are under state control and in all states. Okay. You use the word casteism. How many instances of caste-based prejudice do you regularly come across with respect to those temples which are not under government control? Why are Hindus so easy to accept their guilt, even in places where it does not exist? Why are we constantly resorting to self-flagellation in the name of caste? How much do we understand about the history of this particular system? How much do we know of the fabrication of this particular history? It's almost as if you enter the boxing ring and before the other guy lands a punch, you're saying caste. Who does it? Don't do it. Does casteism exist? Yes. I'm not denying it. But you have to realize that when somebody resorts to casteism in temples, everybody is scared of the SC/ST Atrocities Act. How many people have the guts to do it? That legislation has really no checks and balances, and that's exactly why the Supreme Court had to come out with checks and balances, which the government and center undid, so to speak. Tell me how many people have the guts today to commit a caste-based atrocity and get away with it. Impossible. Socially, you're out. Legally, you're out. You won't even get to present your case before the court of law. A lot of people have committed suicides during the course of the proceedings because of the social ostracization that they go through the moment this case is filed. The reality in, let's say, in rural areas when it comes to the manner in which this is invoked to settle personal scores is unbelievable. That is also another form of reality, that is reverse casteism, so to speak, and that too through the means of a legislation. How many people are willing to actually take this position in public? Guilt somehow seems to be a one-way street. It shouldn't be. So, when we raise the issue of caste as the primary hurdle, it gives the government a convenient handle to say, that's why I'm needed in temples, because if I'm not there, you guys will fight amongst each other. So bust this myth of casteism in temples as much as possible. So I don't know when it will see its own fruition in terms of temples being free. None of us needs to go to court. We don't need to go to court because the central government has the power under the concurrent list to come out with a model legislation. We don't need to go to court for places of worship act because the legislature can repeal what it has passed. We don't need to go to court for the Waqf Act. You can repeal it, amend it, but we still constantly seem to be going to court. So I have to go to court under the previous dispensation, and I have to knock the doors of the same institution under this dispensation. This is exactly why I said policy-wise there's been no difference. The difference is the other side is fantastic when it comes to making regime changes inside the bureaucracy and policy changes the moment it comes to power. You know why? They have their plan of action ready. They don't think after coming to power. They do. They've built a network of think tanks and policy-based pressure groups across the country which have their own, let's say, asks, so to speak, ready, which the government is expected to deliver the moment they get into power. The biggest problem of this side is its impotent, useless activism on social media which never translates to policy-based pressure. You have not created such institutions yet. I'll give you an example. As a practicing lawyer, what I try and do, given whatever little, let's say, visibility I have, is when someone comes and asks for money and says, no, do you need any money for anything you support? I say, please don't insult me with this question. I'm a practicing lawyer. I don't need anything from anyone. I can take care of myself and 10 other people, so get lost. But there are people who need that money. So I identify and say, this group is doing a lot of work. They don't have the support. Put the money there, put the money here. The best of money bags, from this side, so to speak, have zero interest in policy-based changes, by the way. They don't invest in policy think tanks because it's not attractive enough. It's a boring job. Because the ROI is not going to be immediate. They want to see an immediate return. I'm saying this VC mentality when it comes to policy will not work. This is not venture capital. It'll take its own sweet time to deliver the results. Indic policy groups and think tanks suffer the most when it comes to dearth of resources. Brilliant people who have given up their fantastic lucrative careers are putting in their own money to come out with policy think tanks. But you see, when such a talented group of people come, after having given up their careers, that means they already have families to take care of. They would have ramped up their lifestyle to a certain extent when they were in the private sector. They're expected to give it up once they enter the policy sector. Who's going to pay them? That's the hope that the temple will fund such groups, but the temple itself is shackled. So I'm genuinely saying this. The money bags in the Hindu society must look for investment in policy, serious research, not Twitter influencers, not YouTube influencers. That is second grade and third grade investment. Primary investment is in policy. Do that. I'll have some random person sending, sometimes it's so frustrating, they'll send a message. Sir, 10 or 15 cows have been stolen in my street, can you file a case? I take the issue seriously, but you don't even know who is supposed to handle what. You don't have a sense of scale and priorities. So sometimes it's astounding that a community that has done well for itself from an education perspective really has no first clue as to how to read the room. It sucks at optics terribly. I don't know what is wrong here. So I'm genuinely hoping that we make the transition. So political victory, I think largely the job is done. And thanks to the stupidity of the opposition, it will never come back to power in the next 10 years. Not because nobody is making mistakes, but nobody has the brains to call out mistakes. Or the interest, because their vote banks are interested only in constantly indulging in identity politics. And as long as they keep doing that, this government will continue its Rath Yatra. You will not be able to dislodge them. Take it for granted. Unless they commit a major blunder, you will not be able to dislodge them. Now that means, so that level of, let's say, that ground has been covered. So what is the next base? Okay, now the public is more conscious of its Hindu identity, which you see in the perpetual outrage factory on social media. So that level of awareness is achieved. The next level of awareness is calm thinking in terms of solutions. It seems to be slightly more difficult to push people in that particular direction because it's not attractive enough. It requires a lot more homework and hard work. And it requires specialized skill sets, which you're expected to imbibe or equip yourself with. Most of us have engineering backgrounds. By default, people who support this particular thought process have utilitarian qualifications and not humanity-based qualifications, because you look down upon humanities and then you wonder what's going on in humanities. So that shift is needed. At the very least, you need to be able to produce 25 to 30% of the talent pool which is dedicated to humanities, which means history, which is looking at linguistics, which is even looking at Sanskrit studies for that matter. So the hope is that we will move into this phase slowly. It will take its own sweet time, but I think it will happen. Next.
Yeah, this is
Yes, sir.
Professor Shekhar. I'm very happy at the beginning you did mention the name of a very well-known literary person, Dr. S.L. Bharapa. Incidentally, I am the honorary secretary of S.L. Bharapa Sahitya Pratishthan.
Okay.
And for your information, he is 92. For the past 5 days, he is sitting in one of the scholars' house just to understand few concepts. And that is a level with which he works on his novel or any literary material. My question, based on the understanding of the books that you have written and some of the lectures that I have watched, did a cohesive, wholesome, self-asserting identify existed prior to 18th century? Or was it just a loose collection of different segments, varnas, sects, or classes? That is one question. The second question, just now you talked about the caste. How do we overcome the caste identity and choose Indic identity, particularly in the current situation? Thank you.
So I think both your questions are connected, and the second is answered by an answer to the first, significantly. So let's assume that caste consciousness was higher 25 years ago, must have been higher than that 50 years ago, must have been higher than that 150 years ago, must have been higher than that 200 years ago. Okay? So my point is, if according to you, the society was divided on caste lines, and I don't mean you, I'm saying in general, if it was divided on caste lines, who do you think was fighting the Mughals? Who do you think was fighting the Deccan Sultanates? Did people refuse to participate in these wars saying, you're the Brahmin, I will not fight for you, you're the Aryan, I will not fight for you? When did these questions start? These questions started only after the entry of the missionary along with the European colonizer. Until then, these questions were never there. They never existed. Rana Pratap is fighting Akbar. And there's a very popular documented episode of him taking support from the Bhils and the Gonds. They didn't say, we are Adivasi, you're an Aryan invader, no support. No. Rana Pratap had no problem sharing a meal with the Bhils and the Gonds. He was a Kshatriya. These are Panchamas. Where is the problem here? Who has invented these fault lines? I will be delivering a lecture in the den of this fabrication, JNU, on the 20th of December, the title being Invented Fault Lines of Bharatiya History. So I'm getting ready with all the ammunition for that. So the point is, sir, Ahilyabai Holkar feels the need to go and rebuild Kashi Vishwanath. The Marathas feel the need to go and rebuild temples across the place. Guru Gobind Singh is telling his first 5 disciples, go to Kashi and learn the Vedas. People are constantly moving up and down this country in the name of Char Dham Yatra. That has connected us for millennia. What divides here? The divide is significantly to be attributed to the man who comes here saying, you know what, I will show you heaven and I will take you to that place. You just need to change one thing about yourself. Your identity, that's it, and the job is done. Surprisingly, we are struggling to blame the blatant, manifest, evident culprit. Because the filter called secularism prevents you from articulating that point. The Sarvadharma Sambhav Vada Pav Pav Bhaji goes on, where you don't want to talk about it. Why don't we see a very clear question that I think even Sri Konrad Elst has put, which is, show me rebellions in the nature of let's say the rebellions in Europe and other places, where there is a Varna-based or caste-based rebellion against the Brahmins and the Kshatriyas and the Vaishyas in that period, prior to the entry of the British man here. When has that happened? You've never been able to show anything. You can't seem to explain the continuity of motifs and symbols between the so-called Indus Valley civilization and the Aryan civilization. You're not able to actually explain both, because you don't wish to accept that they were part of an organic whole, that there is a continuity in terms of stages. I was told by Mr. Salman Khurshid at the Times Now Summit on public debate that you should treat the entry of the invaders from the 12th century not as invasions but as migration, apparently. But when it comes to Aryans, the word that is used is invasion. So why is this burden on me to accept the subsequent two waves of actual invasion and colonization as migration, but to treat something else which doesn't even have a basis as invasion? How is the subsequent fellow more important to me when the first fellow is responsible for the creation of the Bharatiya identity and the Dharmic identity? Your question ties into the first question that was asked. Here's what I would suggest. I had the pleasure of sharing space with Sri Ashwin Sanghi, this well-known fiction writer, but his understanding of history is brilliant. Read his latest book, The Magicians of Mazda. I think that's one of the finest coups which somebody has pulled off in explaining the history of Muslim invasion in this country without talking of Muslim invasion of Bharat, but by speaking of Muslim invasion of Persia. He's like, if I talk about my story, you're going to say it's propaganda, you're going to call it Sanghi literature and whatnot. Okay, let's shift the focus to some other country and see what happened there. Let's see if your mind has the basic common sense to draw parallels between what happened there and what happened here. Because I am not going to be allowed to speak my truth. Let me use somebody else's experience to speak about me vicariously. Brilliant writing, read it. Absolutely engrossing. The way he captures the relationship between the Iranian civilization and the Vedic civilization and the common roots between that. And at the end of it, he has given brilliant references also. Unlike most people, I go through the references just to see what is the strength and the pedigree of the research here. It is brilliant. Next.
Sir, this is about Uniform Civil Code actually.
I have answered this question several times.
Yeah. Will it solve a 140 crore population of India? Will it actually solve, sir? This will become an agenda for the main political party. My question is crisp, will it be able to deliver?
I need to know the goal and I need to know what is the relationship between the proposed solution and the goal. Until then, I will not comment on the viability of the solution. In engineering, we have a method called the Euler's method, which is EULER. Unfortunately, we have to read all sorts of German equations in engineering. So, the problem statement, let's say, flowchart there is, identify the problem, and then you start creating an iterative flowchart of the solution, and there's a feedback loop that is created. I still haven't been able to address what is the problem statement behind UCC yet. Spell out the problem. You can't say I will come out with a solution and constantly keep changing the goalpost of the problem according to my convenience. That cannot work. It's a very serious issue. You say, to this audience, I will sell this as this, and to this audience, I'll sell it as this. Before you come out with the solution, tell me what are you addressing and how much am I going to suffer in the process. Until then, I will not comment on the subject. Yes.
Yeah, good evening, everyone.
Yes.
I just wanted to understand. So this is the hate which is going on the 2 to 5% population community in India. That is a Brahmin community.
Right.
Whether they really tortured the lower class the way they are projecting right now, because we have been taught from very long time they are the backbones in the society,
right,
to learn, to support, to help the kingdom for its flourish and to have a proper systematic approach in the society.
Right.
But today we have become more than like a Dalits. I'm just telling you the facts. So there is no reservation for us, no opportunities in the job, nothing. So we have been ousted from the society. I just wanted to understand whether this all happened after Ambedkar's strong intervention in the caste system, or just he wanted to focus on this aspect. So I just wanted to understand where it all started. So we are the sufferers right now. So
Right. So I'll give you a slightly different answer. So when you think of Mahabharata and you think of instances of casteism in Mahabharata, what are the examples that come to mind? Ekalavya and Karna. Why aren't we told that all the casteist abuses hurled at Dronacharya when he was in the battlefield? He was constantly being told, "Hey Brahmin, get off the chariot. What are you doing here? This is the place of the Kshatriya." The number of times he was constantly attacked for his caste. Those examples never come to the fore. Why? Because it becomes inconvenient to accept that the feeling of exclusivity and supremacy is not unique to any particular group. Everybody was preserving their own turfs. The warrior was protecting his turf. The mercantile community was protecting its turf. The teaching community was protecting its turf. How many instances do you want from Mahabharata where this has happened? Okay, I'll give you an example from my home state, in that sense, Tamil Nadu. Please do a sample survey of the number of instances of violence against Dalits and identify the number of times a Brahmin was found setting fire to the hut of a Dalit. Find out which communities are involved in this. Please go ahead, do it. Okay? I can show any number of instances where I know for a fact in my own family that Brahmins have not just married non-Brahmins, they've also married who are otherwise called, let's say, Dalits and Shudras. I'll show that from my own family. I would like to see the very same example coming from the group that is called as the OBC group today. How many people are doing it? I am not in a popularity contest, so anybody can fight with me. You will not be able to beat me in an argument when it comes to facts, so go ahead. I don't care for popularity here. So my point is, you want to talk facts? Here are the facts. 3. The appropriation of this entire history by one individual is perhaps the problem with the way we understand this history today. And the valorization of one particular individual at the expense of a journey of several thousands of years is unbelievable. An individual who is not qualified from a genetics perspective, or from an archaeological perspective, or a linguistics perspective, is somehow being credited with being the repository of all that is related to the caste literature in this country. How is this possible? Would you accept a lawyer speaking on gynecology unless they have some real training to show? I don't have any training in history, which is why I have to compensate in my books through multiple citations, so that I stand on the works of others who are credible. Otherwise, I have really no standing to speak on history as a lay student of history. As a minority, you don't have muscle. And 2, you have bought into the guilt literature heavily. And therefore, you don't find the voice within you to stand up and say, please tell me how long am I going to be saddled with this literature? Where is the cutoff point for this? And how long are others going to benefit at the expense of my bashing? These are some real hard questions to ask. But here's what I would say. There is also the other reality where Vaidika Brahmins continue to gain or continue to have a lot of respect from the community. Relatively, which, let's say, from those segments of the community who are free from the politicization of this issue and who understand the value that comes with that kind of training, who understand what it takes to be a practicing Brahmin, so to speak. But the fact is that number is shrinking constantly. And therefore, I genuinely believe that most of us are free riding on the coattails of the currency of a previous generation without practicing anything. That is equally a reality. If you think of the Brahmin community as the missionary arm of the Hindu society, and there is a sword arm separately, the missionary arm has stopped taking its role seriously. And the day it takes that role seriously, I'm not saying things will change immediately, but people will certainly ask. Because you see, let me also say this. There is an inherent respect in the previous generations because most people were taught by Brahmin teachers at some point. So it calls for some kind of an introspection from our end also, as much as I think that the mirror should be shown to others. But this conversation is so fraught with problems because this dirty linen should not be washed in public. Others will take advantage of it. So it's no more a conversation between members of the same family. There's an outsider constantly waiting to see how can I poach one member of the family. So I think it's not an easy question to answer. But all I can say is hopefully our own conduct and our own commitment to our identity is perhaps the beginning of the movement towards an answer. As long as you think of this as an identity which is legal in nature as opposed to a practicing identity, you may continue to find yourself in this position. Next. Ma'am, you had a question. Yes, please.
Hello. You mentioned poaching. So a little background about myself. My ancestors came from Pakistan.
Okay.
With nothing. I'm new to Mysore here. I've built a home here very recently, just 3 months ago.
Louder if possible,
yeah,
please.
I've built a home in Mysore just 3 months ago. I'm new to Mysore. I've been coming here for many years, so I'm very familiar with the place. There are two types of poaching that are happening on me. One, when I built the home, you know, what you said about what is the Muslim community doing right. You know, I went to buy tiles. Along with the tiles came the plumber of the same community. Along with that came the electrician of the same community. Along with that came the painter of the same community, the cleaner, everybody, the carpenter, exact same. One after the other. And I was like, what is this? It took me a while to understand what is happening. So all the economics got centered with one community.
Correct.
Right? Which is something.
And those economics which you can't lead your life without.
No, you can't lead your life without.
Correct.
And these are the people who came who had no problem cleaning the bathrooms, who had no problem cleaning the place, who had no problem with any kind of work. And it went on, right? At a second level, because I'm a single woman, I'm a prime target for the poaching and the conversions, right? Because it is thought that I don't have a family support here, right? So when I go out and have my dinners or lunches at the cafe, I'm part of the yoga community here, so it happens very early in the morning, you know, my timings are a little different from others. So there is we don't realize this, but there is in Mysore a field force in action, like a FMCG sales force conversion.
Correct.
Right? Which invites me for teas, which invites me to the Church of Mysore. And when you go to the Church of Mysore, you realize that the caste system is there.
Correct.
What did these people run away from? The Church of Mysore is the Indian caste system alive. Right? So, I mean, from your perspective, when you did this research, tell us what are they doing? These are just small experiences, but on the ground experiences. What are they doing right, what we are not?
So, my reading of the subject and my interactions tell me two things are at play. One, there is a decentralized zeal at the individual level which gets centralized support when they need it. Which means the individual is a practicing member of his community, and should he choose to do something in the name of the community for the community, he will always find backers to support that initiative at every level, from the bricklayer to the lawyer. So there is a church in Delhi which conducts annual sessions for young lawyers to identify the best of talent. And their grooming for their career path is assured by the institution, as long as they take up causes for the community. That is not limited to that particular community alone. Scholarships and awards and whatnot are. Now, it's not as if the caste identity is absent there, as you rightly said. I have revealed in the second book that in the 1882 census, there were 80 castes in Muslim community. That continues to be the situation even today. Brahmins might marry non-Brahmins. Ashrafs won't marry non-Ashrafs. That's the reality. They take it very seriously because the Arab blood and purity needs to be preserved. They'll not intermingle or mix it with anybody else. That's why I say that every time we say caste, 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 get your facts and history right. As long as a human society exists, diversity of thought, whether it's within the Christian denomination or the Muslim denomination or the Hindu sampradaya, will continue to exist. What they have successfully done is to identify who is the outsider and who is the insider to the larger identity. And that's where you wallow and beat around the bush. You're not asking for anything that's unconstitutional. You are saying, my institutions for my people, that's it. It was so difficult to convince people from the Hindu community that why should non-Muslim members benefit from the tenders being given for temple festivals? Why can't I even ask for exclusivity in those institutions which belong to my community? This is it's not for the municipal corporation. This is for temples. You don't know where to be broad-minded. You don't know where to be clear. You constantly wallow in this Udarwadi nonsense. Why Mysore? Are you telling me that the situation is any different in South Bangalore? No, it's not. Plus, there is the other critical component that there is a growing elitism in the Hindu community where certain jobs have been given up. And it's not even as if they're succeeding at better jobs. You've given up on such a major area. Could someone please give me the copy of my second book? And there's a reason why I included this. This was after a lot of research, talking to a lot of scholars. I put out this shloka. I'm very clear about what shloka the first book began with, the second book and ended with, and so is the case with the second book. Read the shloka which is on the opening page just before the contents page, and this is from the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. Wait for me to finish it, and it will tie into the answer that I gave before. In the beginning, before creation, this whole cosmos was all indeed Brahman, the one and only. Being the only one, he could not scaffold the cosmos, which is he could not hold it together. He created further an excellent form, Kshatriyahood. Those Kshatriyas among the gods. So there is Varna system among Devas. Indra, Varuna, Soma, Rudra, Parjanya, Yama, Mrityu and Ishana. These are the Kshatriyas. Therefore, there is none higher than Kshatriyahood. Hence, the Brahmana upholds the Kshatriya from a lower position in the Rajasuya sacrifice. He imparts that glory to the Kshatriya. The Brahmana is the source of the Kshatriya. Therefore, although the king attains supremacy in the sacrifice, at the end of it, he resorts to the Brahmana, his source. He who destroys the Brahmana strikes at his own source. This is not Manusmriti. This is Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. I could have quoted the Manusmriti, But people think that Manusmriti is an aberration from the Vedas. It is not. So deal with it. He becomes more wicked as one is by destroying the enlightened. Now from there, so the creation of the Kshatriya and the Brahmana is not sufficient. So then what happens? Yet Brahman could not scaffold the cosmos after having created the first two Varnas. He further created Vaishyas, which are called Ganasa, because they are in groups. The species of gods were designated in groups. Who are the Vaishyas? The 8 Vasus, the 11 Rudras, 12 Adityas, 13 Vishvedevas, and 49 Maruts. And yet Brahman could not scaffold. Now wait for the punchline here. He further created the Shudra Varna, which is called Pushan. What is the meaning of Pushan? This earth is Pushan, for it nourishes all that exists. That is the value of the Shudra community, because it is the foundation of every society. It is not a cuss word, it's not a swear word, it's not a bad word, it is not a casteist insult. This was always a very proud word. Yet Brahman could not scaffold the cosmos, as he was doubtful about controlling the ferocious Kshatra. He further created Dharma. This Dharma is the controller of Kshatra, hence there is nothing greater than Dharma. So that there is an honor code everywhere. Otherwise the tyrant wielding the sword has no rules to fetter him with. Plumbers, mechanics, never hurl that jibe called puncture wala at anybody again. Don't do it. Please never do it. It reflects baseless elitism and stupidity on your part. Never do this again. Electrician, plumber, driver, mechanic, your house help. These are the people who let you go and sit in an air-conditioned office. Let them all go on a strike for one day. That's the end of your life cycle. Your productivity is gone for a toss. Therefore, you have to reframe the question. You have miserably failed at killing caste. Go for the lower hanging fruit, kill casteism. There is a difference, which is try and address this by creating a larger identity that you can relate to. That identity is always the bottom line for survival. Hindu and Hindutva. Hindutva is the means, Hindu consciousness is the goal. Try this, and that's exactly why every person who's been speaking of Hindutva has not done this just because it's meant to be a response to other predatory ideologies, but it's also meant for you to come together as a community, rising above your local identities, whether it's linguistic, regional, or caste-based identity, or the subsect identity. That's where you get it right. Because when you try and create a mythical Hindu unity after having destroyed every local identity, there is really nothing left here in terms of something to latch onto in terms of way of life, in terms of institutions, in terms of traditions, in terms of gurus, in terms of whatever is it that you want, the safety net and the guild that you've built over millennia. Enmeshing both forms, the micro and the macro, and melding them together is where the trick is. And the melting pot in the institution which must help you perform this is the temple. The temple has 3 roles. Creation of a consecrated energy space, which is meant to create a certain degree of divine presence in that place. Go to Delhi, why does it feel negative? Because all temples have been destroyed. Delhi air feels negative because it lacks in consecrated energy spaces. You go above the Vindhyas and you come below the Vindhyas. Tell me that you don't sense an energy difference. Of course you do. Someone was joking about it the other day. I don't know how much of truth there is to it, because I am not an expert in Itihasa. They said, after the fight between Nagas and Arjuna should have done some kind of tarpana for the Nagas, because they were the ones who lived in Indraprastha, and therefore which was called as Khandaprastha, and that's why that place is yet to come out of the curse of the Naga. Dharmaraja builds a kingdom, but he can't even enjoy it, and he enjoys it after having lost all his relatives for a period of 36 years. So I don't know, I'm not getting into this beyond that. All I'm trying to say is that the solutions are in the past, and therefore history is a very important lesson. Sir's question as to how we existed as a community prior to the 18th century is the answer. Okay, when people say, why were we not able to repel all these invaders? Ask the very same question of Greek history. Until Alexander, he is known for world conquest, but most people don't realize his primary contribution. Until Alexander, in the war between the Persian Empire and the Greek states, since Greece was fighting as different feudatories and states, they were never in a position to repel the Persian Empire. So that man brings them together and then fights, and then makes them a world-conquering force. Apply the very same example between Alexander and Chandragupta Maurya. Then you create an empire which has the ability to beat everybody else. So the answer is, our individual identities are important, but never give them pradhanya and primacy over the overall identity. Find a way to balance that ego. If the temple and its let's say, so what did I say? The first is the consecrated space, and the second is where it provides a nerve point for people to come and solve their problems without the interference of the state. Don't depend on the state to solve all your problems, because then the community becomes entirely dependent on the state and loses its sense of self-reliance. The other two communities can run their own institutions without state support. They can run their own schools without state support, their own malls without state support, their own health institutions without state support. 3, you create safety networks. The temple has performed the role of even bank, so to speak, going by what Mr. Sanyal has said in the past. Which means when someone from this community needs money, let him not go to a predatory poacher. Let him come to us. Let him take the money from us. I'll take just one final question. Yes, yes, sir, yes. I'll come to you next, 100%. Yes. Okay.
And the empire can be ruled under a queen. Sometimes I heard from a politician in Bangalore.
Take the mic.
The present dispensation is also following a similar rule by bringing Ram. I am changing your discussion from caste to Ram.
Right.
Ram was made a single ruler. Do what he says. Do what he did. Not like Krishna,
Right.
So, why do you think do you believe that the empire promoted Ramayana in place of Mahabharata, which provides for discussion and debate? How would you respond to this?
I don't have the knowledge or the depth to answer that question. I'll be honest. Maybe so, I don't know. So I choose to not venture out of my comfort areas, particularly when I know for a fact that there's not enough depth there. I don't know, I haven't done enough reading of these epics from those perspectives, so I am not in a position to answer that question. I am certainly not an expert on everything under the sun. Thank you. Next. Yes.
Yes, sir. Sir, that you were talking about Indian history being wrong, which we knew from a long time. Still, it is not rewritten. I would like to bring to your attention, there is a new book which you might have read, Dawn of Everything.
Okay.
Which is challenging everything that has been written about the world history itself.
Who's the author, sir?
Some Greenbrier.
Okay.
There are two authors, David Greenbrier and another Green. And 24,000 years back, the way people used to live, and they are finding more and more anthropologically.
Right.
And they are telling they were having a better civilization than what we thought it is.
Right.
And they are also telling the so-called philosophy developed by Hobbes and Rousseau was really developed by North Indians. And they were actually one some Kondia Ronk or somebody like that one.
Okay.
And it is now just being written. So when are we going to see our history being studied like that, and we may find so many things which we are still not reading at all? That is number one. The number two, you have been so eloquent and trying to convince us. When are you going to, or are you thinking of giving up your lucrative job in the Supreme Court and coming down and taking up this one full time? When are you thinking of doing that?
So let me take the second question first. Never. Identity or those skill sets for anything under the sun. Simply because every person has to have a very clear picture as to who they are and why they are. When I entered law from engineering, I've said this before, I felt as if Atma was entering Sharir. It's a profession I dearly love. As someone who comes from, and let's say who's climbed the economic ladder and the social ladder the hard way, I am never ever going to give up the financial independence that I've derived as a consequence of my professional standing, which gives me the ability to effectively speak my mind without being beholden to any party or any organization. So I'm never going to give it up. 3, until the society values people who do this full time, I am never going to do this for anyone. I have seen how ungrateful the society has been to people who have done this full time for several generations. I must be an idiot to give it up. I will never do this. I carry the bitterness of a lot of people who have died bitter deaths despite their work and despite never being recognized by the community. The Muslim community is more grateful for the people who fight for Muslims. Hindus are ungrateful when it comes to people who fight for Hindus. That's a reality. Deal with that uncomfortable reality and swallow that bitter pill as a community. Everyone who stuck his neck out for you is isolated and always lonely. That's the reality. I am not going to be a fool. 3, my ability to fight the other side is because they know that I know my subject at least as well as they do, if not more. That time will decide. So giving it up also means giving up an important arsenal and astra in my, let's say, in my hands, in my quiver. Not happening. Now coming to the question of history, I don't have any hopes from any government anymore when it comes to history revision. But I'm happy that in general the society is more receptive to the works of authors like Vikram Sampath, to the works of authors like Dr. Subhash Kak. So there is a rising tide of Hindu dharmic awareness, which means it might translate to greater consumption of the content, even if it's put out through the alternate medium, which is through the publishing industry, not through the curriculum. I don't think I could have expected the sale of 1.25 lakh books on such a dry subject written by a lawyer in perhaps the most prosaic, archaic style possible 5 or 6 years ago. That shows that people are willing to consume this content despite my limitations in terms of being a free writer, which is to say, my prose doesn't flow as freely as Vikram's does. Because I write like a lawyer, 1, 2, 3, 4. The way I argue is how I write. The structure is also meant to be bullet, 1, 2, 3, 4. It's not meant to be for easy consumption in that sense. People cannot read my books, they have to study my books. I have changed that style of writing significantly in the second book. But still, what is my nature will remain my nature, because I am not going to compromise the strength of my ability to articulate for ease of communication beyond a point. Because then I lose the basic strength that I have. 3, the one good initiative that the government has come out with, and I will give credit where it is due, is the support for IKS centers across the country and universities across the country, which is Indic Knowledge System centers. It's been set up in my alma mater, IIT Kharagpur. It's been set up in several institutions in Karnataka. Across the country, it's been set up. So these clusters of fantastic talent pools across the country will hopefully generate the literature needed, as well as the policy to mainstream that literature. I think perhaps Given, hopefully, if the government has been thinking on the lines that I suspect they have, then this is a step in that particular direction. But the larger question would be, assume for a moment that the government were to come out with a fantastic new board called Indic Education Board or Dharmic Education Board. How many Hindus would subscribe to it? I am being trained in Hindu Darshanas or Sanatana Darshana by a professor of Sanskrit from Kanchi Mahavishwavidyalaya. These are people who until 2 or 3 generations ago were in secular professions. They had a specific instruction from Mahapariva Sri Chandrasekhar Saraswati, chose to give it up, and they run on the basis of public contributions and only on the practice of the Veda. So I asked them, as someone who's gotten used to a certain lifestyle, I asked them, as a lawyer, I need a few, let's say, certainties in terms of where the revenue is going to come from and all that. How do you survive? Especially at a time when people are not exactly inviting people for yajnas and homas and all that. Their only dialogue and response was in Tamil, Vedam Kakkum, which is the Vedas will protect me. That is the group that needs protection at the end of the day, the so-called reviled evil Brahmin who is still fighting to protect the Veda with absolutely no support from anybody else. When I went there, a 6-year-old was being taught by an 8-year-old, an 8-year-old was being taught by a 13-year-old, a 13-year-old was being taught by a 15-year-old. That's the tree there. I was ashamed at my lack of knowledge. So I am putting my faith in such efforts by committed people who are into Bija Raksha in the truest nature, in the purest form, and a lot of people who still believe that there is still some value left in the practice of being a Vedic Brahmin in that sense. They are the only ones truly keeping the Anushtanas alive for all practical purposes. The day we have more and more people hoping that, okay, I think my child can do both. And from there they make the next step saying, my child will do only one thing and this is that. The day that transition happens, I would say, okay, finally the Hindu society has learned to be grateful to its own heritage and culture. Thank you. I have nothing more to say. Thank you so much.
Sai, you had...
Oh, so sorry. Please. I have given you a lot of adjournments. Please.
But my question may be long, but I'm sure you'll answer with aplomb. Well, we are living in a country with 2 major communities who call themselves minor, and the majority community, of course, is always at the suffering end. Here, what happens is the land holding that I have come to know of. A lot of land holding is with, say, for example, to the Christians. A lot of them with the Waqf board. What they just see some place, they mark their boundary and say this is Waqf board. I happen to travel up country a lot in Karnataka, and I have found that in a distance of about 30 kilometers, there are 57 churches. And mind you, mind-boggling churches. You should look at the architecture. But if you look at the population around that place, once I just casually happened to ask how many people go to this church. I was told that there were 8 families, in another place 3 families, another place 12 families, but the church can house at least 400 people. That is the kind of investment, if I may say, that's happening. Now, it goes back to the basic point where you were talking about the policy making. Here, why can't the government bring upon a policy where for X number of people, you should have one community center, or maybe one church, or one temple, or one mosque, or something to that extent. If they can bring about that, I think the properties, the land holdings, will be. Now you just travel up country, most of the investments by the Christians are huge. They have thousands of acres of land. And is there any, have they been sold these properties, or are they been on a lease for about, say, 90 years, 95 years, 100 years?
I don't believe in that WhatsApp university nonsense. I don't know. So I won't answer that question. But all I know for a fact is, I think you're approaching the problem slightly differently. And allow me to say this, that as a country and as a civilization, until you take a categorical position with respect to demographic balance and conversion, these band-aids will not address a leaking ship. there has to be a clear categorical statement of your identity and an assertion at a macro level. Until that happens, these are very myopic solutions. So today some person, and I get really wild when someone sends me these stupid messages. Someone sent me a picture of a traditional candle, or let's say a traditional lamp, with a cross on the top instead of this motif. Okay, said, sir, please take action against this. So a commercial arguing counsel in the Supreme Court should hold this lamp and go to court. Say, sir, see, I was even given a brilliant solution. Can we use intellectual property laws against theft of Hindu intellectual property? How are you going to establish this beyond a point? You're not even able to establish your own rights over Sanskrit. You want to establish rights over the lamp. The solution is on addressing the question of demographic balance and its direct nexus with conversion. There are countries which have taken categorical position with respect to missionary activity in their jurisdictions. Why can't India do it? Why is it beating around the bush and constantly focusing only on FCRA violations? It's not just about the money. Anybody who's a pastor and who comes from outside this country must be grilled before he is given any kind of visa, whether it's a tourist visa or a business visa or whatever it is. Because given the history of what we have seen as a civilization, we have no reason to trust them. You are concerned about foreign direct investment in defense and foreign direct investment in the press, but what about foreign direct investment in religion? This is FDI in religion in the worst form possible. With the territorial loyalties lying outside this country because somebody else is pulling the strings. Sweden is sending money, Germany is sending money, Scandinavian countries are all sending money. It's not United States, by the way. Germany is among the biggest contributors when it comes to evangelical activity in this country. Most people don't know this because they were among the first to come to poach Sanskrit, to take an active interest in it. Why do so many Indology centers find support in Germany? Correct, Max Muller. So I would therefore suggest that you push for the larger issue first. And it's not legally impossible or constitutionally impossible. There are Supreme Court judgments taking a categorical position against conversion. But does the government have the intent and the will to see it through? That will always be the question. When people ask me a question of whether it's possible in the law, I'll say almost everything is possible in the law. It's only a question of you building the right narrative for it. Tomorrow, it's possible for the government to convince the population that reservation is needed in the private sector. At some point, we thought 50% barrier will not be breached. In some states, it's gone to 76%. In some states, it's gone to 69%. The only thing that is left now is reservation in the private sector. The government will also convince you on that. So don't ever ask whether it is legally possible. The question is, will you do it? Thank you. System shut down.
One last question, if possible. Excuse me. One last question.
Okay.
Second row is handicapped. He can't get
up. Okay. I'll take that. Sure. Let him. I'll take that question and I'll answer this. Yes.
Namaste. My first question is, you spoke of policy change. On that lines, my question is, do you believe that with the implementation of National Judicial Appointment Commission, our judiciary will be able to decolonize itself?
No, but it will become more transparent.
Thank you.
Decolonization has got nothing to do with independence, but I do believe that it will at least tell us how does the judicial mind work when it comes to appointing its own successors. We need more light in that particular room when decisions are being taken. Yes.
My second question is, you spoke about being conservative. I would like to add the words of Acharya M. Hiriyanna, a great philosopher from Mysore, that critical conservatism, I repeat, critical conservatism is the hallmark of Indian culture. With this, my question is, does decoloniality mean that individuals should conform to every group or community activity? What is the space for individual freedom and where is that line? Because conservatism of West doesn't tolerate heresy or blasphemy.
Right. So, I think we need to understand what would a conservative position and a liberal position look like from our own philosophical perspectives. So far, we have been looking at liberalism and conservatism from the Western perspective. If I were to say that I'm a Hindu dharmic liberal or I'm a Hindu dharmic conservative, what would those positions translate to? How much of a departure do I get to make from my community's positions? How much of a departure do I get to make, or do I get to file fresh petitions in the name of Hindu dharmic liberalism, but reiterating the very same position as the Sabrimala petition? Right? Can those positions be permitted? There's a lot of confusion about who are Charvakas, what they do and all that, and that's constantly presented as the Hindu version of liberalism. No, it's not. Charvakas did not believe in moksha. They did not believe in anything which Dharma subscribes to. Charvaka believes in the here and the now, saying that the material and the present is the only thing that's real, everything else is unreal. That position is fundamentally against all your philosophies. That's even worse than the Nastika position. Nastika position only perhaps says that Veda is not the primary pramana. Charvaka goes a step further. So I don't think we understand those positions yet. So I'm not in a position, so interestingly I have Hiriyana's book, Acharya Hiriyana's book on Hindu philosophy as one of my reading books. So Chandradhar Sharma, Hiriyana, these are the books that I read when it comes to the Shaddarshanas from an English perspective until my training is complete. So I do agree that being a Hindu conservative is not the direct consequence of decoloniality. No, that's not what I'm saying. I am saying derive your positions of both liberalism or whatever it is from your philosophy, but you don't try and retrofit and say, can I find the mirror image of a Western principle in the Hindu society? That's not decoloniality. You're only saying, I will treat this as the benchmark. I will only ask whether the benchmark has come from me. You're not questioning the existence of the benchmark or its validity in the first place. That may not fly. So I'll come to your question. This, sir, how do we engage with people who identify themselves as secularists, who are very vociferous about Hindu religion and its errors, but are totally blind to other major religion? Why is this onus only on Hindus to... A Hindu secularist might as well be treated as a Vidharmi, which is to say, I don't see him as part of a Hindu fold at all whatsoever, because then that person has failed to understand the Christian roots and the Christian nature of secularism in the first place. So I don't generally see a secular Hindu as a Hindu in the strict sense. I see them for all practical purposes as gone cases who have been written off. Because when push comes to shove, my question is, when you have to take a position, when the chips are down and I'm fighting for my survival, will you be on my side or the other side? I don't think you'll be on my side. That's where I would effectively draw the bright red line. Yes?
So yeah, to continue that thing, again, we essentially believe in the separation of church and state, right?
Right.
I don't have any issue with that, but let's say you are totally against, you are ruthless against, say, some temple not allowing women. Fine, okay, I'll accept that argument, but why are you blind towards another community where the 1939 laws, defined, I don't even want to get to that statute and all. Why are you, totally reluctant to bring in reforms in that community, and you're forcing it through the throats of Hinduism? Like, you are very eager about reforms about Hinduism, that is good, but why are you blind towards Muslim or Shariat law, something as that?
Right. See, I think it's a case of cognitive dissonance where secularism in the context of Bharat always translates to minority exceptionalism and protection of their way of life, and the imposition of the constant reform project on the Hindu way of life. That's what it is exactly translated to, but it's not an unintended consequence. This is the intended consequence. When secularism was introduced in this country, and its origins come from the pre-constitutional roots, when you read the first book, I've explained this very clearly, its entire purpose is to de-Hinduize the native Hindu as much as possible by pushing him in the secular basket. Okay, after the 1857 rebellion, one of the first things that they did was they realized the first way to loosen the Hindu identity of the Hindu is by killing his caste identity. So they said, at the workplaces under the colonial establishment, nobody will be allowed to wear their caste identities, which is no tika, no this, nothing of that sort. They started that. The downfall of the Hindu civilization effectively starts from the rules introduced after 1857 and not before. I would still say you may have lost battles here and there, but you never lost your sense of self. When you lose your sense of self, effectively the defeat is complete. And that started only after the active investment in terms of employment changes, coupled with introduction of English education, almost which went hand in hand. So they used education on the one hand, and then they decided that Why don't you become part of my administrative infrastructure? But if you want to be a part of my administrative infrastructure, these are the changes that you must subscribe to. They went hand in hand. So,
can I continue, sir? Not a rebuttal.
One last question.
Continuation, not a rebuttal. So again, you came this thing, right? That displaying of Hindu symbols and all. Very recently, we had a 2-judge bench which stood balanced 1 and 1, and kind of it might be referred to a 3-judge or a 5-judge bench. Right. But the point being, what Mr. Harish Salve said is that on the face of it, prima facie, this
which matter are you referring to? Okay, take it.
Yeah, that you said display of
Right.
So Harish Salve spoke to a TV said, and prima facie it might appear that their 14-15 is being violated, and there is no question of them being not allowed to the educational institutions. But he also made a very important point to the anchor, although she did not ask that thing, that let us consider this issue here. It is not that women are not being allowed to educational institute. Their parents are making them choose between education and religious identity.
Right.
So if we, this is a slippery slope, that if we, treading this path, so tomorrow that person will say, we want our religion identity over education, and this does not violate 25 and something as such. This, will open a Pandora's box. So where does where do we stop here? Like, if we, let's say if we allow them, then tomorrow any community will come and say, our wearing of identity, religious identity will trump over uniform and all.
Right.
Where do we bring the uniform in school? Because the point being, when the religious identity trumps over uniform, the very idea of uniformity gets destroyed.
Okay, now this will be the last response. Okay, yeah. Assuming that I were to observe the Ayyappa Diksha and I were to go to school, I have to wear the black and I won't be wearing footwear. Forget the uniform altogether. Should the school allow me to subscribe to those rules or not? What is your position as a Hindu?
Again, if it is a uniform, right now I'm a law student, so we don't have any uniform kind of such thing.
In a school, tell me in a school where there's a uniform. In a secondary education school or in a primary education school, I, as a student in 9th standard, I observed my first Diksha in a Christian school. Okay. Now, should I have been allowed to do that or not?
Okay, as far as you said, there is no display of religious symbol. You are just not wearing one particular thing. That is shoes.
The Ayyappa Mala is not a religious symbol according to you?
Ayyappa Mala is then
the black dress is not a religious symbol according to you?
Then
it is.
Then, this is where the conflict arises.
So the conflict is in the Hindu head. I'll tell you why. Because you're more interested in depriving them of their hijab than preserving your ability to wear your symbols in the school. The best response came from the girls of that school who effectively said, we'll start wearing saffron scarves. Go to hell. You are effectively saying that I will somehow try to justify secularization of my identity and also impose it on the other, and somehow the other must go through the very same stupid deracination that you have gone through. Why should they? What is the argument being presented here from the Hindu perspective? Okay, so someone happens to be a simultaneous student of Vedic education and modern education. He chooses to wear the shikha, removes the hair everywhere else, and he has only the tuft. Isn't that a visible symbol of religion?
Yes.
Then he should remove it. Should he remove it?
Well, again, this leads to me the question, where
get out of the trap of secularism. As long as you operate within secularism, you will never have a clear answer. You will never have a clear answer as long as you accept that as the norm. Reject this notion. Reject it as a value which is good. It is not for the Hindu identity. Okay, let's go a step further. Assume for a moment that some lady chooses to go to Melmarathur, which is close to Chennai, and is in the red sari, who's observing that vratam. What are they supposed to do? Not wear it?
Again, that would be a violation.
Exactly. Because the rules have been decided, you're just finding how do I conform to the rule. And they're saying, I will question the rule itself. Get out of this trap as soon as possible. Last question.
Thank you, sir.
Go ahead. Yeah.
It's a bit different question.
So I keep saying this, let Hindus be less worried about what the other side is losing and worried more about what they must protect. When you do that, you're better off.
Yeah, you have spoken about this in the past on different platforms. So the question is, you brought up a crucial point about Western family system being shattered. So what are the real causes of this? How did the things used to be back then? What can we take away from it?
So I think my response would be a combination of my problem with Western colonization. At the same time, they got lost in that, in the idea that they were selling to the rest of the world so much, they didn't realize it was coming back to haunt them. Let me explain this position better. When the Protestant Revolution started in Europe, it started off for two reasons. One, the Catholic Church is corrupt and so on and so forth. They were selling confessions and whatnot in return for money, all that was there. Plus, there was a monasticization of Christianity that was happening parallelly, which presented a challenge to Christianity. So they merged and a lot of things happened. So Protestant Revolution said, let's take away the monopoly of the church and let religion be democratized. This happened barely 5 centuries ago. 5 centuries later, Europe has lost its Christian identity. The value of something is typically explained over an enlarged time scale, not in 20-30 years. You will see the impacts of it gradually. You want an Indian example? I'll give you an Indian example, but before that I'll tell you what is the point I'm making. De-ritualization of a religion translates to secularization of that particular religion, leading to erosion of that religion over a point. So Christianity started with de-ritualization. The Protestant reform started with de-ritualization of Christianity. It has now led to de-Christianization of Europe. Okay, now what is the Indian counterpart? Some denominations were started in this country saying, I don't want the Vedic Karmakanda, I don't want the ritualism of the Brahmin, and I will start a new sect. At least some people said that was how it was started, when in fact that's not the case. Punjab is going through a massive wave of proselytization now, because they de-ritualized their own panth. They moved it away. So in the book, in the second book, in the portion where I deal with communal electorates, I show how there is a conscious attempt being made around that particular period in the 1920s to de-Hinduize Sikhism and bring it closer to Islam by saying all and every symbol of Hindu relic in Sikhism needs to be rubbed off and scrubbed out. They gradually kept moving in the direction. Today, at par with Andhra Pradesh, Punjab is going through a wave of Christianization. And that too in the holy city of Amritsar, which is supposed to be the holiest spot for Sikhism. Old religion will laugh at new religion when new religion says rituals are useless. Because old religion is saying, I will wait until you learn your lesson. And I'll come back with a stick to teach you the lesson properly. Because you don't understand the value of ritual. You're constantly saying, I am interested in spirituality but not in religion. That is the stupidest statement I've ever heard. Spiritual but not religious. You're not an elevated soul yet, so relax. Moksha is not within your grasp yet, relax. It's not as if you're walking 2 feet above us like Dharmaraja's chariot. Okay? You're not levitating at all, right, Lisa? And you're not walking on water. For you to climb that ladder, you have to go from the process of ritual and gradually move to a different state. Everybody wants to be a Vedantin and Advaitin. What are you talking about? Your mind is not yet elevated for that. You will have to go in that particular direction in a certain way. So this is the reason for the downfall of Europe. In my limited analysis, at least one of the causes. It may not be the sole cause, multiple factors. Breaking down of the family unit, then destruction of the gender identity also. Exactly, you kill every institution possible. What is it about dharma which makes it so important? Is that it's saying, order and arrange your life in accordance with cosmic principles as much as possible, in accordance with nature as much as possible. The more you try and move against nature, you are expected to, let's say, create vikritis of this sort. And with that, everything starts eroding. Every principle that humankind has learnt after millennia of evolution, every, let's say, trait is being destroyed at the altar of what? Because you have chosen that a particular value has to be foisted uniformly across the board and it must be weaponized. Equality is being weaponized across the board. Because you don't know how to apply equality with viveka, with discrimination. You don't know what is the circumstance where equality applies and what is the circumstance in which equality cannot apply. Because anybody who speaks against equality is a Savarna, Manuvadi, upper caste fascist Brahmin. That will be the immediate label against me. Nature is giving you lessons all over the place. You learn from it, then you're a rishi. Because you're able to see through it. And you're able to understand the message that's coming from nature. You choose not to do that, it's to your own detriment. Some first principles and basic principles of society must exist in order for the chakra to continue. It is mighty irresponsible on the part of people to want to destroy all these structures with absolutely no viable replacement in sight. What is the replacement that you have given? The rise in mental issues and the decline of family structures have gone hand in hand in the West. Now they're finally realizing, oh, nuclear family was perhaps our first step towards destruction as a society. All these days when we were saying it, you're like, no, regressive. American relatives will come and say, why are you living in joint families? Nuclear family is the way forward. With pride, they would come and spew their garbage. And then we would replicate that. Use and throw is the policy. I think we are not going towards anything new. We are merely unlearning what we know and relearning what we knew. That is what is happening. Jai Shri Ram.